Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for the Day in the Life series with Dr. Kelly Rabenstein. I'm going to first just give a little intro for those of you who are new to the series. We started this series when the master's program launched. So that was back in 2016. And the idea behind the series was really to give students some idea of what comes next. So, while you're in school, it's a great time to start thinking about what path you're going to take, thinking about where your schooling might take you and what these different careers in psychology look like. We originally started by focusing on developmental psychology and IO psychology because that was the focus of the master's program, the tracks that we had there. But since then, over the last several years, we've expanded it to include our bachelor students and to really think about expanding outside of those two tracks. And tonight, Dr. Rabenstein is going to talk a little bit about IO psychology, but really she's a counseling psychologist. So it's great to have that perspective. And because we do have a psychopathology track for the undergrad, and many of the students that go through that track are interested in counseling psychology. So hopefully you have some great questions and you'll be able to hear a little bit about Dr. Rabenstein's path within psychology, how she came to her career, the things that she does every day in her career, and then we'll give an opportunity at the end for you to ask any questions that you have. You can feel free to put the questions in the chat or the Q&A feature during the presentation, but we'll probably end up answering all of them at the end. So with that, I do want to introduce Dr. Rabenstein with her bio, give you a little bit of background. She goes by Dr. Kelly. So Dr. Kelly is a licensed counseling psychologist. She earned a Master of Science in Applied Developmental Psychology from the University of Pittsburgh, a Master of Arts in Counseling Psychology at Boston College, and a Doctor of Counseling Psychology at Chatham University. Her focus is on relationships between people and the ability or inability for individuals to deeply connect through interpersonal communication. Dr. Kelly is also an adjunct faculty member at the City University here at our SPS, which we're very happy and grateful for, as well as Purdue Global University. And in the past, Dr. Kelly worked in a wide range of clinical settings, including hospital inpatient, detention centers, partial programs for children and adolescents with autism spectrum disorders, inner city schools, private college prep schools, several universities, community mental health, community organizing NGOs, and as a consultant for companies who want to improve productivity through increased communication. Dr. Kelly's writings have appeared in academic journals, magazines, online news sources, and more. She is often asked to make appearances as a mental health expert in the media. For example, ABC, TEDx, the Doctor's TV show, Bustle, Mike, Thrive, Real Simple, and Pop Sugar, for example. Dr. Kelly lives in Charleston, South Carolina with her daughters, a golden retriever, and a black kitty named Friend. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kelly. Dr. Kelly, thank you again for being here and for doing this for our students.
Thank you, Carla. First, I want to thank Carla for inviting me to do this wonderful evening, and also CUNY SPS in general. What a wonderful program this is for students. And we were just talking, this is something that I would have loved to have had when I was anywhere in my training and education, an opportunity to hear more about what people are doing in the field, where you can go with your education. And so I hope that as I'm going through talking about my career, my path, what I do every day, that if you have questions, of course, post them in the chat and I will look forward to answering them. We will leave time at the end for answering questions. And I'm open to questions about almost anything. I've had a winding path that you'll find out about more in a moment. But my goal tonight is to provide some information so that if anybody's wondering about what they can do with their degree or what might be next for them, or if they should dream big or what they should think about for their career, that hopefully this will provide some answers or some kind of ideas of what you can do. So I'm going to share my screen so that you can see my PowerPoint. And my whole screen. There we go. And I want to see this whole slideshow. Oh, good. Okay. So I picked the vibrant colors because they're fun and I love them. But I also think that the mixture of colors is what makes up your life. So I wanted to start with the very basics. Who am I? And in my life recently, I've had to go through, I wrote a book, which I'll talk about in more depth later. But part of the process is defining who I am as a professional. I had to create a website, a social media presence, etc. And I don't know about you, but it was harder for me than I thought it might be to boil myself down to 2 or 3 characteristics. And the 3 that I chose are author, psychologist, and teacher. So what I talk about today, I'm going to focus on those 3 areas. And I'm going to talk about my life a little bit as well, outside of my work, because it's a huge part of my life path and how I get along every day, and how I find meaning and purpose in life. So I am an author, and Carla mentioned a few of the things that I've done. And also I did just write a book. It's called Psychological Secrets for Emotional Success. And the subtitle is It's All About Love, because it is. And I'm pretty excited about the book. It is the culmination of all of my training and education work that I've done to this point in my career. I found myself with patients and with companies I was consulting with, or I would give a talk somewhere and they would ask, is there something you can leave? And then I learned, the best thing to do would be to be able to hand them a book. So that is what I did. I sat down. I feel extremely privileged that I was able to get the education that I have had and the experiences that I had in my training and in my work life. And so I wanted to share those things with other people. And all of my writing, the book, but everything that I do, I write for publications, various publications, or I speak as a media expert. And what I'm always thinking about is how to help people live more authentically and to have the best experiences in life. And everyone listening right now is having this experience. So whether, wherever you are in your journey, whether you're an undergrad, you're somewhere in graduate school, you're a professor, we have a special gift that we're given when you're training and learning in psychology. One of the things I loved most about it, and I feel like it's a magical little secret, is that when you're training in this field, you are expected to try some of these things out for yourself. You learn things that make complicated everyday life relationships a little easier. People do this because of this. We can take all of that knowledge and add some color to our lives and understand perhaps why the people around us act the way they do. And I wanted to share that with people. So that's a huge part of what I do. And that would be the author part. I am a licensed psychologist in South Carolina and Pennsylvania. I'm from Pennsylvania. I've lived a lot of different places, but that's where I'm from. And I maintain my license in both places so that I can see people via telehealth in either state, which came in very handy, obviously, during COVID. And I do see patients mostly on telehealth now. But up until very recently, I was practicing, I had a private practice and I've practiced in collegiate mental health at different colleges throughout my career. And I've always loved that. And that often, by the way, is the thing that people think of when they think of counseling psychology. But one thing I definitely want to impart this evening is that there are so many things that you can do. And that's part of the wonderfulness of it. So the teaching part, obviously I teach at CUNY and I love it. I've been very lucky. I've been here it'll be 3 years in January. And I enjoy that. I've taught online. I've taught brick and mortar, many different schools. And I do act as a media expert often. And I do that through reporters reach out to me. Sometimes I go on television. But if there's a question about psychology, relationships, things like that, that I can answer, I'm happy to do that. Because again, Many times I find that I'll give information that psychology students know, but that the general population hasn't had a chance to hear before. And it's not a secret recipe, even though secret is in the title of my book, but it's helpful to people often to hear a description of something that they have been feeling or experiencing. I often say that our job, one of our jobs as therapists, mental health workers, is to add more light than heat. And often when we do psychoeducation, which is what I do when I'm speaking as a media expert, I'm giving psychoeducation, and then it can give people a clear understanding of something that might have felt more complicated to them, or let them have a little bit more of an objective view or a different perspective, so they can approach the relationship or the situation in a different way. So that's always my goal. Obviously, also, I am many other things. I am a family member. I am a single mother. I am a partner. And all of these things sort of work together. And I want to say why I went into psychology while we're here on this slide. There were many things that I wanted from my career, from my field, and my vocation. And I do believe, I feel very, very lucky, because I do believe that psychology, being a psychologist, is my calling in life. And I don't think everyone gets to experience that for bazillion reasons. So I do feel very lucky that I believe that it's my calling, and that I get to do that every day. So there were many reasons I went this route, and I will talk more about the specific route that I took, but I want to talk for a minute about what my goals and values were in choosing to become a psychologist. So I wanted some kind of personal satisfaction in my work, and for me, that had sort of two pieces. One is helping people. I felt strongly that whatever career I had, I wanted to be able to help people in some capacity. That's important to my identity and my values and who I am as a person. And then the other piece of that feeling of personal satisfaction for me is getting things accomplished. I wanted to be able to make changes that I could see. So for me in my career, that has become being able to run departments, being able to do program development and implementation. So seeing a problem and then being able to do something about it. I get very frustrated inside. Well, like today's voting day. And that, right, politics can be frustrating, no matter which side you are on. These are things that sometimes can feel out of our control, and they impact our daily lives. I desperately wanted to have a career where I felt I could have a vision, I could see a problem, I could have a vision, and I could help do something about it. So program creation and then implementation and evaluation are all very important parts of what I wanted to be able to do. And I learned over time through my path that I needed to have this degree to get into the rooms I wanted to get into, to be able to create these programs, or be able to help with the difficulties or struggles or problems that I saw. Also, mental stimulation was something that was very important to me in a career. And it's very lucky to be able to have a career and a job where I'm in a position where the expectation is to constantly be a lifelong learner, but more than that, to be a scholar, to be curious about what's happening in the world. And just to tie that in, by the way, to being a media expert, one thing that I love about being involved in the media, having relationships with reporters or other outlets, is that I have to stay on top of what's happening and how psychology might plug into that, or what a psychologist could say that could add information to that. So I that's very important to me, right? That piece of being able to stay mentally stimulated, to continuously learn, and for that learning to then interact with the person that I am as a professional. So that was also important to me. So personal satisfaction, mental stimulation, like continuous learning is another way of saying that. I needed flexibility. I knew that before, but that was a goal that I always had. And that flexibility, I needed for a couple of reasons. One, because I am a mother, a partner. Even before, though, I knew in life there was a certain amount of daily change that I sort of required. But the flexibility and being able to choose what I do, variability, you could say, would be another way of saying that, in both my daily tasks and also what my days look like, what my different roles are. So, you can see that there's author, psychologist, and teacher, but each of those has many different roles within it. I've worked at many universities where, even as a faculty member, which is technically one role, I've held many different roles within there. As a therapist, I was, running groups and being the group coordinator. So there's lots of different aspects that you can do. And that was important to me in a career, being able to see new things, learn new things, and incorporate them into my work and have variability in my daily life. That was very important to me because I worked at jobs for a long time where I didn't have that. And I wasn't as satisfied or fulfilled or happy. So I'm going to go to the news. So what was my path? So I want to say I am a counseling psychologist. However, I do a ton of what you could call IO psychology. I consult with companies on a very regular basis. And I sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. I do a lot of work so I take my counseling. So there's all these different sort of tranches of psychology, right? So there's many different, and then within that, the psychologist can do practice, you can do research, you could do both, right? Which is what I wanted to do, a mixture. But what's interesting that I found is that you can start off one place and then through your experiences in education, right? The kind of role, RULE, is that if you're going to start a new area of specialty or expertise, you need to get the appropriate amount of training that goes with it. You can't just put out your sign and say, okay, now I do testing. Well, I took 2 classes in my doctoral program and I did an internship in neuropsych evaluations, but that's not appropriate for me to now say, oh, I'm a neuropsychologist. And it's the same with any area, but I will say, so I'm saying 2 things. One is there is flexibility, and the other is, and you need to get the training that goes with it and the experience to call yourself an expert in something. So over the years, I have trained and worked with companies and consulted in many different areas. And I would feel comfortable, not saying that I'm an IO psychologist, but saying that this is definitely one of the areas that I focus my work. Okay, so here's a little bit about how I got to where I am. I'm going to give you my background. So I started off and I wanted to be a teacher. That's all I ever wanted to do. I loved kids. I was a nanny in college. And I wanted to be a nanny. And so my idea was, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to be a teacher. So I went to undergrad. I did elementary education and art history because I loved art history. I loved art. I love art, but I'm not good at it. So I appreciate the art. So that's what I studied in undergrad, and I graduated in the year 2000. And that was not a good year to become a teacher in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is where I was living at the time. That's where I was from. And there was a mass exodus of people. And so the schools were all closing. So that is how I ended up. I worked for a nonprofit organization that was environmental. I learned a lot about public-private partnerships in government. And that actually, ironically, led later to my understanding of how government and private public partnerships worked, how non-government organizations work, into my future as a consultant. But at the time, I felt very lost. I had graduated, I had lots of loans, and I did not know what I was going to do next. I wasn't teaching. I did not love that job. It was extremely monotonous, and I didn't feel like my was contributing in a way that was meaningful to me. So I ended up going back to school. I got into the master's program at the University of Pittsburgh. which trained to be a child life specialist. If you don't know what that is, I encourage you to look it up. I teach now often. I'm here in Charleston. I teach at the College of Charleston in their master's program in child life. But at the time, in the year 2000, child life was very new. So what child life specialists do is they work in hospitals with pediatric patients, and you help them go through procedures. You work with the family. And one of your biggest goals is to help them have the most developmentally appropriate experience possible. Because when kids are in hospitals, a lot of times they end up having what we call a developmentally asynchronous experience, right? Like, so that's why we have proms, and we make sure we get the teenagers all together. We try to give them an experience, whether they will be, able to recover or not. They should be able to experience their time in the hospital as positively and developmentally appropriately as possible. So that's what I trained to do in that program, and I loved it. And a side note, Mr. Rogers was in that program. It was called something else, but that is the same program that Mr. Rogers did, and he's my hero, so that's very important to me. So I finished that program, and during that program was the first time in my entire life I had a faculty member who I loved, Dr. Johnson. He sat me down, and he said, "Kelly, what do you want to do next?" I said, "I don't know. I love this. I'll be a child life specialist." At the time, there were maybe 2 child life specialist jobs anywhere. There was, one in Pittsburgh and one there in Boston, maybe in the big cities. And he said, I was taking a qualitative research class with him. He said, "Have you thought about getting a doctorate, a PhD?" I had not. My parents didn't go to college. I was extremely happy with where I had gotten in my education. And he sort of struck that idea with me. And so I started doing research with him, and that was it. It's struck something within me, and I loved research, and I got the idea to get a doctorate. However, again, life plopped in, a variety of personal things happened. I finished that program, and then that I wanted to practice. And so one thing that I didn't know, because no one had told me, was when I went into that master's program at Pitt, that it wouldn't prepare me to practice therapy. I wanted to be a therapist. I wanted to be a child life specialist, but I really wanted to be a therapist always. In fact, once when I was student teaching, one of the faculty members sat me on the floor and said, "Really, you should be a therapist," because I was talking to the kids all the time. So I found out that my program hadn't prepared me for that. And so I ended up moving to Boston and starting the counseling psych program. So I had to get the second master's degree, which in the end worked out wonderfully. And I got to do research, which helped pay for that. And then I could have stayed there forever in Boston, but my father got sick. So then I moved back to Pittsburgh and ended up eventually getting my doctorate in counseling psych. So I was 34 when I graduated, or 35 maybe, when I graduated with my doctorate. I had worked, I'm leaving out a lot of things, but I had worked as a master's clinician for many years and did a lot of things in the interim, but I was 34 when I did get my doctorate. So as I said, one thing that I do is I do keep myself relevant, or that's not the word I'm trying to say. Research is the word I'm thinking of, up on the research. So I do try to keep publishing and thinking about, what's happening in the field, and keeping up with that, and the consulting. So I want to talk about the consultant piece specifically. That's one piece that even my friends and my other programs will ask me, how did that happen? How did you get there? So I want to take the, smoke and mirrors away from it. So I was a practicing psychologist. I had a practice from when I was a master's, when I was working with my master's degree. And then I just kept practicing. And then through my marriage at the time, we owned a company, a tech company, and I was involved in helping to create programs and the policies, and I learned a lot. It was a digital marketing agency, and it was very tech oriented, and I began to interact with other business owners and learn a lot about how businesses are run, corporate culture, what happens when policies are not created around diversity and inclusion. And I just became extremely interested because it fell right in line with my ideas of people being able to live authentic lives and communicate with one another. So I did a lot of teaching and writing and research, and I started putting myself out there with the people that I knew that were running companies, and they would ask me for help, and then that would grow. And so I wanted to be just a little bit more specific. So yes, it was a winding path, as I've just described to you, but also I took each of these pieces of what I had done and was able to parlay them into one of the pieces of my career that I love the most is the consulting. Sorry, I'm just getting over a cold. So I want to convey to you probably the most important thing that I might say today. I said yes. Every time someone asked me, can you do this? Can you do that? Can you come and talk to this? We have a sticky situation. Can you help us with it? We'd like you to do a talk. We have this group that isn't working well with another group. I said yes. I tried things. I networked. It wasn't natural for me at first to put myself out there. I put myself out there with social media, which is still sometimes uncomfortable for me. You are more than welcome, if you're interested, to look up my website. It's just kellydoc.com. And that is, and my handle for Instagram and Facebook is at Dr. Kelly Rabenstein. And I just really learned a lot about how to put myself out there, how to start talking to people and learning what would help people, what from psychology would be beneficial to other people that I could offer the world. And so that is what I kept doing. And that saying yes and taking chances was the thing that led to now I feel very comfortable consulting, and people call me, and I do go fly around and help companies large and small with situations. And I still get nervous sometimes. I still get imposter syndrome. I still wonder, why am I the person here? But, it always comes down to listening and those really fundamental counseling skills that I learned as a counseling psychologist. And they have never steered me wrong. Listening and reflecting has always been helpful and tends to get people where they need to be. I'm not saying there haven't been difficult situations, but I have found that if depending on my education and training has really served me well. So I wanted to just briefly talk for 1 second about what my typical day looks like. So what you're not seeing on this list is, again, that I am a mom. I have 2 daughters that are both in elementary school, and I think Carla did mention I have a dog and a cat, and I might get another cat, which I'm not sure why. That I have this house and it floods and all of these other pieces. And I feel like I know it is so important to discuss that, because tonight, before I spoke to you, I made dinner in this very room, and I had to talk about the ins and outs of bedtime. And one thing that I loved about COVID, what happened with the pandemic, it's a weird sentence, but it seems that our boundaries are changing a little about understanding that human beings have work-life balance needs. It's not a want, it's not something extra, and that we are whole beings. And so I do want to mention that. And I really want to work to normalize that. And that's become one of my focuses when I work with companies. So I do teaching and writing. I do teach at CUNY. So that's something that happens every day. I respond to media inquiries. I do also, I have PR people that help with that. They send me things. I'm writing, and I write content. Sometimes people buy it from me, and sometimes it's in my name. And I research. One of my main, I do a lot of outcomes-based research. So does this work? How does it work? I do that with my consulting now, but I did it with therapy for a long, long time. I love practical research. I love it. And if I can't now because there's no time, but I would talk for 5 days about qualitative research and mixed methods and how it is the magic potion that can help us, take a program or a policy and help people in real time, in real life, and see if it actually works or not. I do a lot of planning. I plan consultations. I network. So, I talk to people about future work, and I do have to create social media content. It's actually part of my contract for my book. And I balked at that for a long time, but now I'm sort of enjoying it. So that is what I do. And then how does my work fit into the scheme of the world? Well, I would like to think that it does in some way. One of my advisors at Boston College was David Bluestein, and he wrote the book, The Psychology of Work, with other authors. And if you haven't read that book, I suggest that you do. It's beautiful. And he wrote another book just a little while ago. But whether we're talking about work or in general, my hope is that my work can somehow help with corporate culture, because corporate culture is life culture. I do a lot of focus on diversity and inclusion. I don't even want to use the term work-life balance. We need a new word. And I spend a lot of time thinking about that because, as I said, we're whole people and we need, to be able to be satisfied in all the areas of our life. Freud said that to be healthy was to be able to work and love in equal measure and, in a healthy way. I'm adding, he didn't say the healthy way part, but we need these things. So I always am thinking about authenticity and well-being, and these are all hot topic buttons. And I love that. I love that being an authentic person, whether it's whatever parts of your identity, is such a part of the broader conversation right now in the milieu of our world. So that's my PowerPoint and my description of me. And let me just stop screen share here. And I'm going to see if there's any questions here.
Thank you so much. Any
Yes.
questions? Let's see. I'll open it up for some questions. I actually want to kick off maybe with my own question. Kelly, can you talk a little bit more about your book and just sort of the inspiration for writing the book, even the process? I think a lot of people don't really understand, like, how does someone go about writing a book, and what that was like.
Yes. Oh, I would love to talk about the book. I never know. It's a very personal thing. Writing a book feels to me like I just took my heart and put it out there into the world for other people to see. So I started writing the book in 2016 after that election, because I was working with companies and I was also listening to my friends and other people. And what I saw was that people weren't listening to each other. Whether I agreed or not almost doesn't even matter. And I thought to myself, there are some ideas, sorry, excuse me, that I learned in my education that could potentially be helpful to this conversation. Ironically, so that was 2016, that was 6 years ago. The book, I didn't start writing it then. I had a 2-year-old then. So I started writing the book about 3 years ago. I started putting it together then. And let me say, this is the process. This was my process. I don't know. I think everybody probably has slightly different. I approach the book in the way that I approach pretty much everything. I have the mantra, one step at a time, one step at a time. And this is a gross saying, but I don't know if any of you have ever heard this, but how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. I need to change that because nobody wants to eat an elephant. But I think the idea is, when you have this ginormous thing, how do you approach it? And that's how I felt about the book, more than my dissertation. The book is bigger, and there was no one guiding me or suggesting anything with the book. I love to write. I will say that I enjoy writing. It's a helpful process for me. So what I did was I outlined it, because when you're writing a nonfiction book, the way that the process generally works is different than fiction. So fiction, which I've never done, but this is what I've heard. You write the book and then you send it to agents or publishers and try to get it published. But nonfiction is a little different. Sorry, I've had this thing and this is the first time I've talked this much. So the nonfiction, you write the entire outline, the proposal it's called. My proposal was 35 pages long. It included a full outline for the book, and that was very helpful for me. And then you send that to agents. You get an agent, and then the agent helps you get a publisher. The process between writing the proposal and getting the book published took 3 years. I did get an agent, which was a very big deal. Her name is Barb. She yells at me a lot. And she signed on 2 weeks before the pandemic really happened in March of 2020. So it would have been a faster process. There was a humongous amount of editing. The hardest part for me was editing, I have to say. Writing it, my process is I get it all down on paper, and I had a goal, a chapter a week, a chapter a week, a chapter a week. And I did that. So it took, I don't know how many chapters there are, I think 14 or 15. So I did that, and then we edited it, and I will tell you, it's much like graduate school. You cannot be emotionally attached. They were very serious, the editor, and they, they cut things, they required different things. I had to rewrite things. So that was the process for the book. And then once the publisher, there were a lot of things that were surprising to me. The publisher runs your life. Once you sign the book away, so I have to maintain social media. I have to have a PR firm that helps publicize the book, market the book. There were a lot of things that I didn't realize, like that they decide the cover. You don't really decide. I got to sort of, they gave me 5 and I was allowed to give my input, but they get to pick. So those were just some surprising things. And then I thought once you were finished writing the book, that was it. Good job. You, pat on the back. No. Then the work really, really starts, where you are expected by the public. And now, if you publish yourself, nothing that I'm saying, you could, and probably people should do that. But you are expected to promote the book, throw a book launch. Used to be the publishers would do that for you. They don't really anymore. You do that. And then market the book, put the book out there, do a book tour, all these things. So for someone who is really, at the end of the day, a very private, introverted person, that's been probably the biggest challenge, is putting myself out there. The book is broken into, so basically the idea is psychological states for emotional success, and emotional success I broke into sections. So self-awareness plus education plus empathy equals emotional success. So the book is broken into those chunks, basically. So there's a self-awareness section. And that's really almost a therapy section, where I'm asking, and there's a lot of activities, and I ask people to do things. A lot of people have said, I have your book, it's sitting on my nightstand because I'm not in the mood to do therapy right now, or I don't want to dig into myself. So the whole first section, oh, I forgot something. I did a TED Talk. I did a TEDx talk. And that is what the book built off of as well. I got the idea is that for that equation I just gave you, self-awareness plus education plus empathy equals emotional success. And that's really what I base all my consulting and everything on, sort of breaking things down and operationalizing them into those categories. But the book is broken into those sections. So self-awareness, and then under that there are subtitles, and then education. That was by far the hardest for me to write, but that was the most, from school, offering some of these topics that I felt were the most important. Empathy, and then pulling it all together. And how can people use these different new skills that they've learned to connect better with people in their lives, in all the parts of their lives. So that's the book.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We have a couple questions in the chat. I'm going to circle back to those in just a second. Denise has had her hand up, so I want to give her an opportunity. Denise?
Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Good, thank you. I just had a question. I just wanted to know more about your, I know your focus is on the interpersonal communication. I just wanted to know a little bit more about that and like what populations do you work with? Like, do you work with specifically
Oh,
autistic children or is it just generalized?
no, I don't anymore. So between Pitt and Boston College, there were, I don't know, years, 4 or 5 years, where I worked. And then throughout my time in Boston, I worked at a camp there that I loved. And I also ran groups, social skills groups. So I did that for a long time and I loved it. And it has certainly informed my work and my thinking, because one thing that I have learned is that what we practice over here, we can apply here, right? Human beings are human beings. One example of that I love to think about is dialectical behavioral therapy. So I did training in DBT. If you aren't familiar with that yet, please learn. It's amazing. And I worked with inpatient women who were actively suicidal, and did the DBT training and experience and working with women there. And I felt like this is, everyone on earth should know this. And in fact, there's a whole section in the book talking about DBT. So going back to the idea of which people do I work with. So in my private practice, I work with women now mostly. And I'm not sure why this happened, what the universe, women and teenage boys. I don't know. It's funny. You get people in like one person and then they said, okay. But for a long time, I did adolescent work and emerging adults. So that's something I'm very comfortable with. But as I went through different things in my life, and different experiences, I went through divorce, I wanted to work with women. And I will say that my private practice, I am only seeing patients now who I've seen for a while. As the consulting grows, there's only so much time in the day. So I haven't taken new patients. So that's right now who I work with. But when I consult with companies, it's everyone, whoever works there. And I love that. So yeah.
Thank you. Sophia asked a question in the chat. Is a master's degree enough for a psychology student, or is it necessary to get a doctorate degree?
Oh, no, you don't. No, it's unnecessary. It worked out in my life for a variety of reasons. But if it hadn't worked out, many things that I'm discussing with you now would be happening. I also, so I think, at the end of the day, what happens is life intervenes. So let's say you get your master's degree and you can practice. If that is what you want to do, then that is wonderful. And you start practicing, and then you never know what might come next. Maybe you have a family and that's a huge part of your life. Maybe you get a job and it requires you to get some additional education. Necessary? Absolutely not. No, what I would say is you don't know where the road might take you. And it happened for me that I was in my early 30s and I was living by myself, and I had this opportunity to get into this program, and it just worked. But it wasn't even my plan. I moved home to Pittsburgh from Boston, not thinking I had a wonderful job working at a nonprofit, a non-government organization, and I loved it. If that hadn't happened, I'd be giving a different bit of information right now to a different group of people, and I would have been very happy in my career. Yeah, because one of the wonderful things about having a master's in psychology, if you now remember, I chose the wrong program at first and couldn't practice, and I wanted to practice. If you didn't want to practice or you want to do something else with your career, then it works out. I know many teachers who have their master's in psychology because it helps them get their principal papers or to increase their income, or so no, definitely not necessary.
Great, thank you. So two questions that are very similar on the chat. I'll combine them together, and then the next one I'll go to you, John. I know you've had your hand up patiently. So the two questions are, first, what can one do career-wise with a master's in developmental psychology? And then the other is, what, in your opinion, does developmental psychology focus on compared to other parts of psychology, and how is it important in our lives? So I'll kind of put those together.
First of all, I love developmental psychology, and I'm teaching it now at CUNY, and I that's a class I love to teach, because, and I always say this in my intro videos, in my first couple of weeks teaching the developmental classes, and as I mentioned, and I don't know, some people came late, I teach the child life students here at the College of Charleston. I teach them development. Development informs, it's sort of, the way I think of it is the lens by which we can better understand or frame the different parts of our life. I think of development as an extremely fluid, in fact, sometimes even circular concept. One thing that has been very exciting in the field of developmental psychology is the idea that we can take development and apply it to psychopathology. So the idea of, so it's called developmental psychopathology, which is the idea that the very way that we develop can impact whether or not we end up having symptoms of certain mental health disorders, and even physical health. So those ideas are foundational to me. And I found this when I did my master's so I did the developmental master's first. I found this throughout the rest of my graduate training and my work, how extremely fundamental and foundational understanding development and thinking of things with that framework has helped me think about my work, how I approach things, and as a parent. But so especially when I was working with emerging adults and adolescents and children, development, I mean, that's something you're thinking about every day in your work. And I find that when I was, working with teachers, that's obviously something important, but it goes so far beyond that, because now that I work with adults, I think about it all the time. I think about, if you think about Erickson's stages, I think, is this person, is stagnation? Are they needing more to do? Is that part of what's happening here? Are they having a hard time with not feeling like they have purpose and meaning anymore? So that's a huge piece. And what can you do with a degree in developmental psychology? Well, you can parlay it into many, many things. Obviously, it's helpful in the education sector. People use it, they become psychometricians, and they use it for some neuropsych testing. There's consulting that you can do with developmental. You can teach. Some schools will have master's clinicians or people with master's degrees be able to teach undergrads. I worked at the College of Charleston with people who had master's degrees who were teaching the same classes I was teaching. So that's something that you can do. You can become a child life specialist, which please look that up if you haven't. There's maybe some more specific things you would have to do, and you can look into that, but that is definitely a core component of it. And then of course, there are people that are developmental specialists, and what they do is they work with kids, they work with families and help understand if there's some developmental delays or difficulties happening. So there's a lot of things that you can do with the degree. And to me, it's an extremely foundational and wonderful degree. You can also do research and help do program development. There's a lot of things.
Great. Thank you.
Mhm.
John, why don't I turn it over to you so you can ask your question?
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks so much. First of all, Dr. Kelly, thank you so much for sharing your time with us and your insight this evening. We're all very grateful to hear your story. I'm in the second year of the mental health counseling master's program at Brooklyn College, CUNY. So my question to you is this: you mentioned you're a published author, you're a consultant. Media outlets contact you. and you are generating social media content. So you are by some would say something of a public figure. And I'm curious how that affects your private practice, especially since we're sort of, in the first year of our program, there was a lot of discussion about maintaining boundaries and not disclosing much about yourself, and that maintaining that sort of distance with the clients. And I'm wondering how you balance that out. And also if you think that that's changing now as more and more therapists and psychologists have more sort of public profiles, whether it's on social media or if they're gaining more notoriety as published authors or public speakers, that kind of a thing.
Oh, I love that question. Yes, it's changing. So first of all, my therapeutic approach is that my orientation. I am a depth psychologist. I do love to practice, depth work, not necessarily psychoanalytic, but psychodynamic for sure, and feminist. And so sometimes those two things have been at odds because the psychodynamic approach is obviously psychoanalytic light, but the idea is that stance, right? As the expert, as a nameless, faceless, not, person, so that the anxiety can raise and the person, you can work through this. And that's sort of foundational to that way of thinking, to that orientation. Whereas feminist therapy asks us to, be more open, more egalitarian, to let the patient drive the ship more, and to not sort of, a feminist psychologist might even say not to hide behind, the facade or the screen. So I will tell you that I've taken this to my own little, which is basically what every therapist does, over time. And my philosophy has been, and I've taught, I've taught doctoral students, master's students who are training to be therapists. And they always ask, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? I don't play games. So first of all, I have a more robust social profile than I did when I was working exclusively with my private practice, or in hospitals or in collegiate mental health. So that is true. However, I do think that I would be fine with that. There are no pictures of my children. I would say, I haven't thought about this before, but I do hold basically the same boundaries with my online presence that I would in a therapy setting. Do I answer a question with a question? No, I don't, because that doesn't help build rapport. Am I going to give them a long answer? No, I'm not going to get into depth. But I won't play games. So, I went through a good example is I went through a divorce, and I lived in a neighborhood. I was in social media. They found out because they lived in the same neighborhood, right? Like, these are the same conversations we could be having a small town therapist. This is a conversation we often have. Build relationships. I worked and lived in a neighborhood where many people that I was seeing lived, right? I left the pool on more than one occasion, for example. But someone had heard about my divorce, and she asked me, and I was very happy that she asked, because she was thinking it, and so it's going to interfere with the work. It would have interfered with the work, in my opinion. So you're supposed to always be able to answer the question, why are you doing what you're doing, in any moment in the therapy room. So my answer would be, I quickly and directly answered, yes, that's happening, and what you heard is semi-accurate. Okay, back to you. So, a more traditional person might have said, why are you asking that? Well, I know what she was asking, because she was curious and it was on her mind, and it was going to be in the front of her mind until we talked about it. It would have been on anyone's mind. So that's my, answer. I do have boundaries, though, on the social media. I don't talk about, if I talk about what's happening in my life, I make sure whatever I put out there that my kids could see in 10 years. Nothing, no pictures of them, no faces of them. So really, I'm pretty much the same no matter where I am, if I'm consulting or in therapy or momming or with friends. So what you see is what you get. But it's funny, John, I hadn't really thought to myself, but there are boundaries on there, because I often think this information I'm giving could be richer if I added more information, but I have lines. There are things that and for various reasons that are not things that I'm willing to share with the whole wide world. So yeah, thanks. That's a great deep question that I will now be like, blah, blah, blah.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both. We have just a couple more minutes, so I want to tackle the last two questions that are in the chat. Both of them are great questions. So the first one I'll start with is, was there a moment after you helped a patient get over a particular hurdle in their life that you sat back and reflected on how much it meant to you to help someone? Did it feel empowering and uplifting?
Oh, I mean, yes, it's a privilege, and I cannot say this enough. It is a deep, one of the biggest privileges of my life to be a therapist. That's happened, but what happens, and I actually wrote about this in my book because it means so much to me. The love that we get all day long, even when people are yelling at me or whatever. And I've worked with a lot of people that were mandated to therapy. I worked with the entire athletics department at Pitt, and they were often mandated to see me, or I also worked in juvenile detention. They didn't want to see me. So I've been yelled at and I've been loved, but at the end of the day, one thing that I don't think we talk about is that as a therapist, what amazing gift it is that you sit with someone, you give them your undivided attention, you have an hour of nothing but basically emotion and love transfer, and then you do that 8 times a day. Is it exhausting? Yes. Is it also truly magical and something that most people don't get to experience in their lives? Yes. And is it a two-way street? So we could talk about countertransference. I could start talking about it now and never actually end. I have strong feelings about the idea. So countertransference, for those of you that might not know, is the idea that the therapist has feelings for the patient or has some kind of reaction. Often it gets used in the yuckiest possible way, like, oh, the client or the patient, the therapist is attracted to the patient. It is so much deeper and more complicated than that. And I would argue that you actually aren't doing depth work, deep and meaningful work, if you're not having some kind of meaningful reaction to the patient. So what I want to say is, yes, I have had wonderful feelings like that. But I will also say that I have had the very great luck of having all those magic feelings, because when you're working with somebody, whether they're making great strides or whatever it is, or you're just deeply connecting, because I believe that the work is the love is the work, that's the magic, that feeling fills up both of our hearts, and it's just magical. So that's good feelings.
Thank you. The last question is from Charisma, who asks, she says, I am actually very intrigued by the how do you eat an elephant concept. So would you be able to discuss that just a little bit more?
So I really, after this talk, am going to change that saying, even though I'm sure I'm going to look up the etiology of it. It's probably an old saying, but the idea is, again, I can't think of any large creature that I don't love that I wouldn't want to eat. But the idea is, well, let's say, how do you build a house? One brick at a time. So how do you do something that is almost insurmountably a huge task that has to occur? And in the case of eating something, you have to do it kind of fast, right? You can't just hang out forever. There's a time limit. So how do we do that is really what I'm getting at. So how do you do something that seems insurmountable, that has a time limit? Well, you do it one step at a time. You take a step and you make the step. You take a step and you make a step. So often we get paralyzed because something seems too big, or I can't do that. But really, what I have found over time, and even in this last, 12 years of my life where I've been very distracted and many different things are happening, is that if you just do small things constantly, quickly, you look and say, oh my goodness, look at this pile that I have accomplished, pile of laundry, pile of dishes, book written, all same, small piles, that quickly become something big. So that's really what that means. I'm going to change that, but the idea is you have this huge thing that has to happen in a timely manner. How do you do it? One small step at a time.
Great, thank you. So with that, I want to thank Dr. Kelly for spending her evening with us and for sharing her path to her area of psychology and answering all of your questions. I want to thank you all for joining us this evening and for posing such wonderful questions. I also want to invite you back to our Day in the Life series events. This is the last one for the fall, but we have 2 more in the spring. And Dr. Kelly, it's just wonderful having you here. And I always enjoy listening to you talk and spending time with you. So thank you again. And thank you to everyone. I hope you all have a wonderful evening and we'll see you soon.